Hi everyone. So I want to do a quick tutorial on how to use form function trees to diagram verb forms. So these are going to appear in diagrams that we do. Your book has talked about them a little bit, but I'm going to talk about them just a little bit more concretely so that way everybody has a solid idea. So when we're diagramming form function trees for verb forms, we are going to be looking at what's called an inflection phrase, right? And this is necessary because what it means is that the verb has tense and subject verb agreement. Okay. And so basically what that means is it indicates that we have a finite verb form. And so in order to have an inflection phrase, we're going to talk about tense. We're going to identify or indicate whether there is the first auxiliary verb. And then we're going to break down the predicate phrase, okay, which contains the verb. Okay, so the predicate phrase is always going to have a verb phrase. And I'll just write here so that way you know what all of the abbreviations mean. And a verb phrase can have, or it will always have, a clear verb, but it may also have one or more auxiliary verbs. Okay. Um, So this is what you're looking at. In terms of tense, you can have present or past tense. In terms of the auxiliary verb, we have two main ones in English. There are others, but I'm just going to write the common ones here. Have and be. And you'll notice that we always use the base form, and I'll just write base form here. And then there are a variety of other auxiliary verbs that we might have. And then you'll have your main verb, which will function, right? I'm going to write a 0 here, which means there's no auxiliary verb. And then here, I will just do an X because it can be any of the main like verbs that we might have. So what this means is that here, whether it's have or be is going to tell us whether we're dealing with a perfect or a progressive function. Similarly, if there's an auxiliary verb here, it could indicate that we have a progressive function. And then here we are always going to have the predicate. Okay. So this is a brief rundown of how the form function trees for the inflection phrase work. We're going to go ahead and scroll down a little bit and take a look at it in action. So we're going to look at runs and was running. Okay. So with runs, we're going to start with the inflection phrase. Right? Because it gives us a clear place to start because we know we have to identify tense and we have to indicate whether or not there is an auxiliary verb. So here we just have runs, right? So that would be present tense, right? There's no verb that precedes it, so there's no auxiliary verb. So we're just going to put a 0 there. And then runs itself, we have a verb which is going to be in the verb phrase, which in this instance is going to make up our predicate phrase. Okay, so all of that indicates very clearly what the form is. So the last thing that we need to talk about then is the function. Okay, runs is going to be the main predicate. Right? And that's it. Nice and simple when it is a simple present tense verb, right? And that's what it shows. We have present tense, we have a predicate, it's a simple present tense verb. So let's jump over then and take a look at was running. Once again, we're going to start with an inflection phrase. And if we're starting with an inflection phrase, we know we're going to have tense, potentially an auxiliary verb, and a predicate phrase. Okay. So if we have was running, was is going to be past tense. So under tense, we're going to write past, right? It's the past tense form of the verb be. And if we have an auxiliary verb that is be, then we are dealing with a progressive aspect, which is the function, right? That makes it progressive in terms of aspect. And then we have a verb phrase, and I'll do verb here, a verb. And this is still going to be our predicate. Okay. So here we have a past progressive predicate, right? Was running. So once again, we distinguish between the form at the top, right, and the function which appears under the lines. All right, so the last one we're going to look at is have been running. And we are going to start in exactly the same way. We have a finite verb, so it is going to be an inflection phrase. That means we're going to have tense. We may have an auxiliary verb, and we are going to have a predicate phrase. Okay. And if we have a predicate phrase, we have to have a verb phrase. And if we have a verb phrase, it means we absolutely have to have a main verb. Okay. So in terms of tense, we have the word have. Now, have is present tense, right? It is an auxiliary verb and it is also the base form. So we're going to write have. And that is perfect in terms of aspect. So its function is as a perfect aspect. That means that if we look at our verb phrase, been running, been is another auxiliary verb and running is our main verb. So been then indicates progressive and running is our main predicate. And so what that means then is we have a present perfect progressive predicate. So once again, right, the form of the words appears up there. And then underneath the lines, we get the function of the words. And this is important because, for instance, have might be an auxiliary verb, but sometimes it's also our main verb. So understanding the difference between the form of a verb and the function that it can have in the sentence is just as important as recognizing a noun phrase and that it can have different functions within a sentence.